Now on BBC News, it is time for your questions answered. Now I'm going to introduce our three guests. With us, the chair of ABTA, which is the Travel Trade Association, Alistair Rowland, the group editor of Travel Trade Gazette, Pippa Jacks, and employment lawyer and partner at Freeth's, Kevin Poulter. All three of you welcome. But just before we get started with the conversation, let's get a little more on the quarantine restrictions for passengers arriving into the UK from Spain. Our news correspondent Andy Moore has been at Gatwick Airport this morning and explains what the latest rules mean for travellers.
When those air bridges were created earlier this month, I think a lot of people thought that the door on foreign travel had opened just a little. Well, now a lot of people, especially in the travel industry, think that door has effectively been slammed shut again. A lot of the airlines here, like individual travellers, are trying to figure out just what this guidance means. Some of them will continue to fly to mainland Spain, others won't. Now, that quarantine for people coming back from Spain here at Gatwick today, what does that actually look like? Well, first of all, you have to provide an address that you will be going to. And if you don't provide an address, you could be fined £100. You're supposed to avoid public transport if at all possible to get to that address. So hopefully you might have your own transport or get a lift with somebody. And then when you get home, you really do have to stay at home apart from exceptional circumstances. It's a much more stringent lockdown than the quarantine we all experienced earlier on in the year. So you can't go out to walk the dog, you can't go out for exercise, you're not even supposed to go out shopping unless you really have to. So hopefully somebody can provide you with the food you need, or you can do online shopping. And we're told by the government that about 1 in 5 people, there will be checks, so you'll be contacted by text or phone to see that you are in quarantine. And if you're not, then in England at least, there could be a fine of £1,000. So it's quite a serious situation, potentially, if you break that quarantine regulation.
Andy Moore, well, let's hear from our guests now and let's hear your question. This one is to Pippa and it comes from Andy. We've been in Spain for 9 months now. If we travel from here to France for 14 days, would we still have to quarantine on our return to the UK?
Well, I just tried to fill in the passenger locator form myself, but because I don't have a booking reference, it wouldn't let me complete it. As far as I know, you only have to declare where you've been in the last 14 days. So technically, you wouldn't have to declare that you'd been in Spain. But really important to note that at the moment, the French authorities are also quite concerned about the situation in Spain. The government's talking about not going to Catalonia, the Barcelona area, and talking about limiting the numbers of arrivals from Spain into France. So that viewer could find themselves in the situation of having to quarantine in France instead. And unless your travel insurance covers you for that, then that will be at your own expense. So trying to kind of cheat the system does create some additional problems, I'm afraid, and not necessarily advised.
Alistair, one for you. Obviously, you represent the industry to a degree. This is from Mike Harrison. I'm booked on Brittany ferries to Santander in September. They've said they are carrying on with my sailing against FCO advice. Can I cancel and get a refund?
Depends on the terms of the operator in this case, because many of the sailings will be essential. So I think Brittany are saying that they'll support customers with claims on their travel insurance, if indeed they've got pandemic cover on their travel insurance, but they're not at this moment offering any form of refund because the sailing will go.
And this one, Kevin, for you as the employment lawyer on our team this morning. It comes from Mandy. I'm due to travel to the Canaries next weekend. I'll have to quarantine on my return. Can my employer ask me not to go? And could I lose my job?
Well, two important questions there. Yes, an employer can ask you not to go, and there are certain circumstances really where they can really compel you not to go. It's difficult at short notice. There is a notice period that's required. But it's an option. Could you lose your job? Well, this is a real difficult question. If you've been employed for less than 2 years, you can be dismissed for many reasons quite fairly by your employer. If you've been there for 2 years, then there has to, of course, be a fair process and a fair reason for that. But what's important, I think, now is having that conversation with your employer. There may already be some policies in place, but try and have that engagement and make your concerns known. Of course, if you can work from home, not too much of an issue. And there are certain exemptions as well to the quarantine rules, which are also worth having a look at.
Helpful advice. Pippa, now another for you. This one comes from Rose in Essex. She says, my partner's coming back from Spain tonight. Then we're flying to Portugal on Friday, knowing that we will have to quarantine when we're back. Can he still go?
So the way it works with the quarantine, I gather, is that you have to serve the full 14-day kind of sentence, if you will. So his quarantine from Spain, he would have served some of that, and he'd have to serve the rest when he got back from Portugal. Obviously, Portugal, you have to self-quarantine as well when you get back from there. So the 14 days would begin again. Interestingly, with Portugal, though, that's still one of the countries that the Foreign Office is advising against all but essential travel to, much to the frustration of the travel industry. So almost the bigger concern really here is whether or not they should be travelling on to Portugal, and their travel insurance is almost certainly not going to cover them for flying on to Portugal on Friday. So that's really something to consider. You don't want to be travelling without insurance in the current climate. Tour operators aren't operating packages to Portugal because of the Foreign Office advice, and now more than ever you really need to be travelling on a package, so you get the package travel directed protection, and booking with a travel agent to make sure that you're not flouting the rules and that you're travelling safely and will be as protected as possible.
And Alistair, this is a knotty refund question coming from Gemma George. My insurance company no longer covers us due to the FCO stating essential travel only. I booked flights and accommodation separately with EasyJet and holiday lettings. What can I do to get my money refunded? I already changed some flights with EasyJet once without charge, but the accommodation provider is stating that I cannot get a refund.
Well, the message for the viewer really is that you're much more protected booking a package with an ATOL certificate from an ABTA agent or tour operator. But in this case, it is likely that EasyJet will offer a change of flights again, albeit there may be a cost. And depending on where the accommodation came from, the consumer would have to follow the cancellation conditions. But if there's no cancellation conditions or 100% to be paid, then the consumer, the viewer, will lose their money on the accommodation. So I would suggest do whatever you can with EasyJet and lobby the accommodation provider, but much less safe than if you're viewing a booked package.
And Kevin, the employment law questions again. This is from Peter. Can my wife's employer force her to take time off work when our flight from Spain landed on Saturday, 10 hours before the cut-off?
Well, the good news for Peter and his wife is that they're not bound by the quarantine rules, certainly the government's ones. What there might be an issue is, of course, is if there's any risk and the employer believes there's a risk to other people within their organisation, they may ask them to take that time just to be sure, maybe even to take a test, just to check, because there's also the obligation to protect everybody else at work. So although they wouldn't be caught by the government's guidance, it may well be that the employer asks them to do that. And if they were asking them to do it, then there would usually be an expectation that the employer would pay them to stay away if they are ready and willing and certainly able, according to the government at least, to work.
Helpful. And Pippa, this one from Debbie. My parents live in Spain. They're coming back to the UK for a holiday. They are staying with us in our home. Do we need to quarantine for 2 weeks as well?
So I checked that out on the government website, and it does clearly say the people that you're staying with do not necessarily need to self-quarantine. So I think Debbie and her family would be fine to maybe go out to the shops and whatever, although the responsible thing to do is obviously to take extra precautions right now. But importantly, there should be nobody else coming around to the house, so no other friends or family apart from Debbie and her immediate household. So there are some restrictions still that Debbie will need to live with for at least 2 weeks, if not slightly longer, because her 14-day period will start when her parents actually arrive.
Yes. Now, Alistair, this one from Wendy is looking ahead till next year. We're due to fly to Malaga, says Wendy, on the 22nd of August. If the quarantine stays in place and we are permitted to change our flights with EasyJet, we would like to move them on a year to next August. However, we've checked the same flights for next year and they are significantly more in price. Is there anything we can do?
Probably have a look at changing the dates outside of the peak season next year. So certainly for flight pricing, it is more expensive next year. You can kind of understand that as the market settles down. But I would suggest have a look outside of the school holiday period, and you should find the flight pricing slightly more sensible.
Thank you. And Kevin, this one from Elle. How is the government supporting employees who suddenly can't go to work for 14 days?
Well, that's a very good question. And what the government is saying and what's actually true might be two different things, as we've found out. There's a suggestion that SSP, statutory sick pay, may well cover these circumstances. But at the moment, even due to the changes, given the changes that happened, I think, in April, that it doesn't quite go far enough. It only covers people who either have coronavirus, have the symptoms, have been told to shield, or have been told to self-isolate by a doctor or through track and trace. It doesn't quite extend this far. So unless there's a change through the government to extend it through Parliament, then that might not be the case. One option that might be available to Ellie is to actually think about approaching her employer again, or speaking with them about if she's been furloughed previously, there may be an opportunity to be re-furloughed for the period of the quarantine. And that might be a solution that works for everybody. But other than that, I'm struggling to think of what they're doing to help right now.
And just before I let you all go, one question from me to all of you is, are you booking holidays or risking going on a holiday to Spain or another potential target in Europe over the next few weeks? Pippa, you start us off.
I'm not flying anywhere in the next few months, but I'm pregnant, so I guess that gets me out of necessarily travelling, being in the higher risk group. But I think I would certainly look at travelling in September, October, getting something booked, but going into that with a very flexible mindset at the moment, making sure you're booking it with a travel agent, with full financial protection and package travel directive protection, and being open to the possibility that things might change, and you need to be okay with that.
Alistair, packing a suitcase?
Hopefully so, yes. I don't have anything booked, but have no problems with going away. And all of the examples we've seen in the travel industry are that it's actually very sensible and very safe, easy to get through the airport, very good in resort. And, you know, hoteliers and destinations have done a really good job of keeping everybody safe.
And Kevin, a destination for you?
Well, I'm quite busy at the moment, as you might expect. But of course, I can work from home. I could work from Spain. I could work from wherever I need to be if that was required. So although there's nothing booked just yet, we can remain hopeful, but I think it might be a staycation this year.
Thank you all. You have been wonderful in providing such great expertise, and I hope all the viewers who sent in questions feel better informed as a result of listening to you all. I certainly do. So take care. See you again soon.